Imagine you are a young Christian woman living in the year 1453, residing in a quiet village just outside of Constantinople. The morning atmosphere is filled with the aroma of bread baking in your neighbor's oven, while the sound of children's laughter bounces along the cobblestone paths. Your husband gives you a farewell kiss before departing for the fields, assuring you he will be back by sunset. You have no inkling that in just a few hours, your entire world will descend into a nightmare so methodical, so well planned, that death itself might appear to be a kindness. Before we go further, if you find this forgotten chapter of history compelling, please think about subscribing and share in the comments where you are tuning in from. Your engagement truly supports our ability to produce more content of this nature. Now, let us delve into what actually took place when Ottoman forces conquered Christian lands. The very instant that Ottoman armies breached enemy defenses, a meticulously planned process was set in motion. This process had nothing to do with military strategy and was entirely about systematic exploitation. This was not a matter of chaos or random violence. This was a policy that was executed with bureaucratic exactness in hundreds of conquered cities and towns. When your village was overtaken by Ottoman forces, the events that unfolded adhered to procedures so specific that they were recorded in military handbooks. The protocol was brutally efficient. Within moments of a surrender, women were divided into categories determined by their age, physical state, and estimated value on the market. This sorting was conducted in public spaces, frequently in front of churches that were set ablaze, to guarantee the greatest possible psychological toll on the victims and any remaining survivors. Young women between the ages of 14 and 25 made up the most prized category. In Ottoman records, every woman is listed with a number and an approximate market price. These were not simply abstract numbers. These were human individuals who were reduced to the status of mere inventory items in ledgers that catalogued them as if they were livestock. The second group consisted of women aged 25 to 40 who were deemed fit for physical labor but were considered past their prime for other uses. The third group, women older than 40, were met with immediate execution as they were judged too old to be worth the cost of food and transportation. Children represented a distinct opportunity. Girls younger than 12 were placed into what Ottoman records deceptively termed formation programs, which were created to groom them for particular roles inside the imperial structure. The psychological warfare integrated into these methods was as deliberately planned as any military operation. Families were made to witness the sorting procedure, with mothers watching as their daughters were put into separate categories, fully aware they would be parted forever. The Ottomans knew that this psychological wound would ripple through the remaining populace, diminishing the likelihood of future opposition. Contemporary reports detail how Ottoman soldiers would purposefully separate mothers from their infant children, not out of any practical need, but to inflict the maximum amount of emotional pain. The sheer scale of the events during the Ottoman conquests offers a blueprint for comprehending their expansionist tendencies across the empire. Within 48 hours following a typical city's fall, thousands of individuals had been sorted through these categories. Women and girls were herded onto ships headed for slave markets located in major Ottoman urban centers. Others were handed out to the victorious army as personal possessions. However, the methodical character of Ottoman methods becomes truly chilling when one looks at their record-keeping techniques. The empire kept meticulous records because these were not unplanned war crimes. They were organized economic ventures that demanded precise bookkeeping. Shipping manifests from that era list human cargo right next to silk, spices, and valuable metals. A standard entry could state 20 bolts of Damascus silk, 40 sacks of pepper, 15 females aged 16 to 20 years, excellent condition. In these documents, the women were not even afforded the dignity of a name, only their ages, physical attributes, and projected values. The economic system that sustained this practice extended throughout the entire Ottoman Empire. Major cities had specialized markets with designated areas for human trafficking, complete with established pricing systems that changed with supply and demand. A young Greek or Serbian woman could fetch 20 to 30 pieces of silver in the markets of Istanbul, whereas women from other areas were sold at varying prices based on their place of origin and physical traits. The Ottomans were not the originators of slavery, but they industrialized it to a degree that preceding empires had never managed. They established uniform processes for capture, transportation, and sale that functioned with the effectiveness of modern-day corporations. Bills of sale, shipping receipts, and market inventories still exist in Ottoman archives, chronicling human suffering with the same level of detail given to any other commercial transaction. What was perhaps most unsettling was how this system generated its own momentum. The measure of success in an Ottoman military campaign was determined not only by the territory gained, but also by the number of people captured. Commanders were given bonuses that corresponded to the quantity and quality of the prisoners they took. This practice created a powerful incentive to target civilian communities instead of just opposing armies. The psychological effect on the surviving populations was exactly what Ottoman strategists had aimed for. Villages and cities that had seen these sorting procedures would often capitulate without a fight as soon as Ottoman armies came into view. The empire's reputation for methodical cruelty transformed into a weapon far more potent than artillery or cavalry. Women who made it through the initial sorting were sent on journeys to different locations across the empire, with each destination holding its own unique terrors. Those intended for the slave markets were transported on specially built ships that had cargo holds engineered for human beings. Evidence from maritime archaeology has uncovered ventilation systems, water storage, and waste disposal methods, all intended to keep the human cargo alive during voyages that lasted for weeks. These ships were not just floating jails, they were also laboratories for systematic dehumanization. Women were stripped of their clothes, their names, and any personal items that might serve as a reminder of their former lives. They were assigned numbers and given basic clothing that signified their status as property. This procedure was intended to crush their psychological will to resist before they ever arrived at their final destination. Ottoman records show that the mortality rate during these journeys was about 15% on average, which was deemed an acceptable loss by administrators who assessed human cargo from a purely economic standpoint. Women who perished during the voyage were simply cast into the sea. Their deaths were noted in ledgers next to entries for spoiled grain or damaged merchandise. The empire's handling of conquered women demonstrates a degree of systematic organization that defies everything we typically assume about medieval conflict. This was not a case of senseless brutality or a failure of cultural understanding. This was a deliberate policy carried out over centuries and across continents, conceived to convert human beings into commodities while simultaneously terrorizing entire populations into surrendering. But the real horror was not limited to what took place during the conquest. It was what followed, when the methodical exploitation of women turned into the very basis of Ottoman imperial governance. The empire's legal system redefined rape as marriage, murder as justice, and slavery as a divine right. Ottoman legal documents, which are preserved in archives all over Turkey, lay out the procedures that made every conceivable form of sexual violence legal. These actions were not exceptions to the law or violations of it, they were the law itself. The idea of war wives became a key element of Ottoman expansionist policy. When a soldier died fighting against Ottoman forces, his widow was automatically declared the property of the man who killed him. This was not an unofficial custom, it was a codified legal principle with detailed instructions for claiming possession. The process of claiming required 3 witnesses and had to be completed within 72 hours of the husband's death. If that time passed, other soldiers could contest the ownership, resulting in conflicts over women that resembled arguments over livestock. Ottoman military tribunals kept extensive records of these ownership conflicts, handling them like routine property disagreements. But legal possession was only the first step. The conversion of captured women into war wives demanded the complete erasure of their previous identities. Their names were altered right away, usually to Turkish versions that had no connection to their birth names. Religious conversion was compulsory and was enforced using methods that blended psychological torment with religious teaching. This conversion process included public rituals where women had to renounce their former beliefs, often being forced to spit on religious artifacts or burn holy books from their past lives. Those who resisted were subjected to escalating forms of punishment that were designed to break their spirit without diminishing their value on the market. The empire operated conversion centers in its major cities, which were facilities built specifically for processing captured women. Archaeological digs at locations in Bursa and Adrianople have unearthed building foundations with specialized rooms, drainage systems, and restraining devices that suggest industrial-scale psychological warfare. These centers were operational for many decades, processing thousands of women through standardized curricula, intended to wipe out their cultural memory and instill total obedience. These programs usually went on for 6 months, which was enough time to ensure pregnancy from systematic rape, thereby creating biological ties that made escape a psychological impossibility. Children who were born from these forced unions were subjected to their own form of systematic exploitation. Offspring of mixed blood were frequently killed at birth if they showed a strong resemblance to their mothers, as they were seen as inconvenient proof of the rape that brought them into being. The survivors were brought up to serve the empire, never learning their mother's true name or her original culture. The psychological warfare was not limited to individual victims, but was directed at entire populations. The Ottomans intentionally made their treatment of conquered women public knowledge, circulating detailed stories throughout the lands they intended to conquer next. The reputation for systematic sexual violence grew into a weapon of conquest more powerful than any military hardware. Villages would capitulate without a struggle rather than allow their women to be subjected to the documented Ottoman procedures. The empire's own historians wrote with pride about cities that surrendered instantly after hearing what had been done to women in territories that had been previously conquered. Fear turned into their most powerful military tool, but even surrender did not guarantee safety. The Ottomans had discovered that a terrified populace was more manageable than a grateful one. Even cities that surrendered willingly often saw their women exposed to the same systematic exploitation, which was rationalized as being essential for the security of the empire. The tribute system made this exploitation official on an immense scale. The well-known Devshirme levy, which conscripted boys, also involved the systematic collection of girls, although this part of the system has received much less historical focus. Young girls were taken from Christian families under the exact same legal authority used for boys, but their final destination and the way they were treated were drastically different. While boys had a chance to climb to powerful positions within the Ottoman government, girls vanished into networks created for sexual exploitation and reproductive servitude. Ottoman records show that roughly 40% of the girls taken in these tribute collections died in their first year of being held captive. They were victims of systematic abuse that their captors recorded with bureaucratic exactness. The survivors were subjected to lives of controlled breeding, managed like farm animals to bear children for the empire. These breeding programs were run in facilities all across Ottoman lands, with meticulous records kept of pregnancy rates, infant death rates, and the productive lifespan of the female captives. The empire's methods concerning female captives show mathematical calculations of human suffering that are beyond our ability to grasp. Administrators in the Ottoman Empire calculated factors like the ideal age to capture girls, the most effective ways to break their psychological will, and the exact equilibrium between exploitation and survival needed to keep the breeding populations productive. These calculations are found in administrative papers that address human suffering as if it were an engineering challenge that needed a technical fix. The cold exactness of these documents, their casual discussion of torture and rape, gives us a look into how systematic dehumanization became an accepted part of the imperial culture. The economic motivations that fueled this system established a feedback loop that grew stronger over time. Military leaders who brought back valuable women were rewarded with promotions and financial bonuses. Slave merchants who provided high-quality females received preferential treatment in government contracts. The entire military and administrative framework of the empire came to be built around the methodical exploitation of conquered peoples. This was not confined to captures on the battlefield. Ottoman forces carried out periodic raids into adjacent territories for the specific purpose of obtaining women and children for imperial use. These raids were timed to follow seasonal cycles, maximizing the number of captures while keeping military risks low. Whole communities existed in a state of perpetual fear of harvest-time raids that could tear families apart in a single night. The raids were orchestrated with military precision, employing intelligence networks that pinpointed the most valuable targets. Ottoman scouts would dedicate months to mapping out villages, noting the most attractive women and the healthiest children, and devising routes that would yield the most captures while steering clear of military clashes. The psychological toll of living under the constant menace of abduction influenced entire cultures. Parents would intentionally disfigure their daughters' faces or break their limbs to render them less appealing to Ottoman raiders. The empire had fostered societies where loving families felt forced to inflict harm on their own children to save them from even worse outcomes. Some communities created complex hiding networks, with underground rooms and forest hideouts where women and children could seek refuge during the raiding seasons. But the Ottomans adjusted their strategies, using torture to compel villagers to disclose the locations of these hiding spots, thereby turning survival plans into deadly traps. The empire's systematic use of sexual violence led to cultural shifts that endured long after Ottoman influence waned. Entire regions established traditions and social norms centered on safeguarding women from being captured. These were social systems that operated on the assumption of a constant threat of abduction and methodical rape. These cultural adjustments stand as proof of the scope and persistence of Ottoman methods. When entire societies restructure themselves with the primary goal of protecting women from systematic sexual violence, it indicates that this violence has become a central characteristic of their reality. The records of these methods exist because the Ottomans perceived no shame in what they were doing. They chronicled their procedures with the same meticulousness they applied to collecting taxes or planning military campaigns, thereby preserving proof of a systematic brutality that spanned centuries. What comes to light from the archives is not arbitrary medieval cruelty, but a calculated policy that stripped millions of women of their personhood and built an empire upon their suffering. The next time you encounter a romanticized depiction of Ottoman splendor, think of that young Christian woman from 1453. Think of the Ukrainian girl who had only 30 seconds before her life was destroyed forever. Think of the Polish mother who saw her daughter led away in chains. Their voices were stifled, their names were wiped away, and their humanity was diminished to market values in Ottoman account books. But the proof is still there, etched in stone and written in blood, awaiting those who are prepared to face the most shadowed chapters of human history. This was not some primitive form of barbarism. It was a systematic evil that functioned with industrial-grade precision, generating suffering on a scale that defies our comprehension of organized cruelty. The archives exist, the records have endured, and the truth is waiting to be told.